Thank you all for coming here today. This is 15 years in the making. I literally was Googling 15 years ago about the TED conference. And Richard's number was literally on the internet. I'm like, oh my gosh, his number's there. So I cold called him. And then 3 years ago, I met one of his friends named Nicholas Negroponte, who's a phenomenal individual. He co-founded the Media Labs. And then I got to reconnect with Richard 2 years ago. And then lastly, these last few months, I said to Richard that I created this GifterX Talks where we want to really inspire people with their stories, and that you told me to do things that terrify you. Or was it terrorize or terrify?
You're telling the story.
Terrorize. And so I said, hey, I started my first one in June, and I shared that, and this is our last one, so it would be a great honor if you could come and perhaps share some stories with us, because you've learned so much, and I've always learned so much from you every time we have a conversation.
Okay. I'm going to stand up because
Sure.
And if people come late, you should have the door open. They can walk in without bothering people. It bothers them if they open the door. So have it open. One of the doors should be open. Would somebody open a door in the back if people come late? Okay, that's fine. Well, one door is enough for a person. You need 18 inches for a person. Okay. You don't have to stand, but you're welcome to.
I want to stand, yeah.
Okay. Well, because the sight line is better standing.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a quote today from Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn is dead, but he is my mentor. He was the most important person in my life. Some people know who he is, some people don't. He was, it's not a test whether you know him or not, but to people who knew him, and to, because I don't know what anybody here does, you know. I can guess what most of you do, but I don't know. I really don't know. He changed my life because he spoke the truth. That seems silly and common. What do you mean he spoke the truth? Well, you don't speak to anybody that tells the truth or asks a truthful question. How's it going? How are you feeling? Stupid. You can't give an answer to that, so it's not a good question. It's a lie. The question is a lie that says, I'm really interested in how you're doing. And I know you're not going to give me the truth because you couldn't really give an answer to that in its fullest. How are you doing? How's it going? Keeping busy. Is keeping busy good or bad? How do you answer that? How do you appear to other people? That's somehow interesting to people. It's how you appear to yourself. I learned from him a lot. I haven't had a job in a very long time. And people think that's wonderful that I haven't had a job for 50 or 60 years. It's not that I can't hold a job. I got fired from the few jobs I had, except I worked for Lou Kahn and I worked for Charles Eames, who was a designer. Those jobs I wasn't fired from. And it sounds wonderful because I hear these stories from people, oh, you're so lucky you can do what you want to do. It's just the word you used before, it's terrifying. Because every single thing I do is something I have to think up. Because nobody has ever asked me to do a book, and I've done about 100. Nobody's ever asked me to do a conference, and I've done about 40. My phone used to ring more than it does now because I'm marginalized because of where I live, my age, and because I don't give a shit, and people know that. But I do enjoy the calls. I enjoyed you calling. This is good for me. So it's like putting oil on your knees instead of getting a knee job. The little exercise I did in the beginning is basically the whole conference, or the whole talk. You just saw what I did. I got rid of the lights because why? In the simplest form, if you go backwards, the lights were serving the camera. They weren't serving me. They weren't serving the audience. So why have them? To get a better picture. Bullshit. All the cameras can get great pictures with little light now. They advertise that. But all the AV people buy into the myth that you have to have bright lights on people to get sharp images. You don't need sharp images. Somebody's talking. I'm not showing slides. It's not important that the image be that good. It could be fuzzy. You could do it with crayons. It doesn't matter. These chairs are too low. They should be high stools so I can see you. The aisle, I already went into that. The aisle is an empty space and it's out of the vision. Your vision is like this. Everything I said was simple. There's nothing mysterious about what I said. It's the dumbest fucking thing you can say. It's going backwards in time to find the beginning. I read Lou has been dead for, well, a long time, 40 years or more, 50 years. Somebody sent me a quote that Lou said to a class, a master's class. Just got it today. It's on my iPhone, which is in my thing there. I don't have to read it. This is the basis of it. He said to his master's class once, and they knew not better than answer him. And he said, the first library was somebody catching a fish. Automatically you're thinking, well, what is that connection? And then you think, well, How does he learn to catch a fish, or what kind of fish is it? You think about searching, you think about, and it's absolutely, seems irrelevant, but that's the way we talked. Mm-hmm. We talked that when you start a problem, you go backwards to find a beginning that makes sense. You don't go forwards trying to solve it right away. What you're solving is the person's question already has preconceptions in that question, and you haven't found the beginning. So it's all about beginnings, just beginnings. And what I did here was an audience and how they sit and where the lights are and how we look and all that stuff. It's just simple stuff.
But you say simple, Richard, but it requires courage to do that. You're like, fuck all this shit. No aisle. Fuck the cameras.
He asked me a question. He was in my house before we came here. And he said, what was I like as a child? Or something that we got back to that, you know. And the story I told him is that some friends, a few years ago, they're now dead. All my high school people are dead, almost all of them. Or I'm down here in Florida. I went to Cheltenham High School north of Philly. At one point, maybe 5, maybe 10 years ago, 2 of the people I went to high school with who weren't friendly with each other, but in different times that I still knew them, said almost the same thing. That what they thought was strange about me or different about me is that I still am the same as I was in kindergarten or 2nd grade, that I haven't changed. So that's a no-no. You're supposed to grow and change. I didn't grow and change, but I was this way. I didn't use the word fuck, but I used other, I had that attitude. And my attitude towards life was always the same, but I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't give stuff to the teacher. I know that going to school is an agreement. Even though the teachers are terrible, what they're doing is wrong, you have an agreement to get through school and get on with it. Now you have less of that agreement because you don't have to go through college, you can leave, there's more things options. At a certain point there wasn't options, you had to sort of do that. My mother's family were kosher butchers, very poor. My father wasn't as poor and he made cigars. So I don't come from a great deep culture, except a Jewish culture of learning. So that was impregnated in me. There was a little film done, there's a very interesting conference that goes on every September. I think it's mostly by invitation, but you can get in it, you should go, it's really good. It's called the Nantucket Project. Some of the problems with it is that it's on a beautiful place, but it's on Nantucket, so some of the people who give money to the conference, they're indebted to, so some of them speak. And you don't want billionaires to speak, and you don't want people who run companies normally to speak or sell or be falsely do-gooders or have a charity that makes them look good and they try to sell that charity. So that mars part of the voice, but the rest of it is really pretty good. The thing that Tommy Scott, who runs the conference, is doing, I think, more and more. In fact, I talk to him now regularly, is take an idea that's an obvious idea again. I did it just a few years ago, and I was telling you about it because it's in that book. It was a conference I did whose tagline was intellectual jazz. And I had this notion, the word understanding, there's a few words that are really terribly important in my life, and understanding is one. And I realized it wasn't singular, that if he wants to understand something, he'll go about it differently than she will or you will. And yet in our heads, in this educational environment that we go through, we somehow feel there's the right way to do things. There's a right way of learning. There's a way. There's no way. That there's different ways, and you have to give yourself permission. And what I did very early on was give myself permission.
But was it from your mom, your dad, or was it more of an internal thing that you said?
No. My mother certainly not. My father not. My father had a job. He was in that sense, a salary man working in a cigar factory. And he was plants manager. So no, he had to get a paycheck. He didn't own the company. He had charisma. I learned that from him. I learned dealing with lots of people. He always had 2 or 3 phones on his desk back in the day, right? And he was very good at arithmetic. And he read a lot of crappy reading and a lot of good reading. And so that was imbued in me. And he was a lovely man. But he never knew what I did. but he indulged me. So I was an indulged child. Indulgement was not getting me a car. That wasn't the kind of indulgement. If there was a book on Paul Klee, K-L-E-E for people who don't know what I'm saying. Nobody knew who Paul Klee was in 1950. I mean, people know who he is today, but they didn't know then. There's nothing I eat today that I could have gotten at my home to eat. All the food, is different than 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, completely different. There is nothing that I eat that's the same. In Philadelphia, there was no Japanese restaurants, there was no Mexican restaurants. All the restaurants had the same menu. There was an Italian market, and there was Italian food, and that was it. But it slowly comes about, so nobody notices it. But everything we do is quite different. Mm-hmm. I would never say 4-letter words in front of people then. And I just decided when I ran conferences, I was just going to be me always. Or on a stage, I was just going to be me. And there was tittering, and some people came up and say, "That's really terrible." I said, "You can walk out. You could not come. You have that choice. That's your choice. And it's fine." And I'm not trying to shock people. It's the word I would say at home when something happens. My wife uses that word. We all use that word. Shit, you say all the time when something happens. So why not talk to an audience the way you talk in real life? Why should you care that you look good? Or you fuck up on stage and somebody corrects you and you say, "You're right. I don't mind making a mistake," because digging yourself out of that mistake, you learn something. There's no losing.
Well, that's with Richard. He writes books when he doesn't understand things.
Yeah, that's a different pattern.
Yeah.
So the story I tell, which is a made-up story, many of my stories that sound like they really happened are just made up. It's apocryphal. I'll tell you when I make them up. Virtually everything. Just make sure you understand everything I'm saying is made up. A lower middle class lady moves to Santa Fe. And she's just amazed by the culture and by the blue chips and by the food and not only the Indian food. You're not allowed to use the word Indian anymore. So I'm sorry if I'm not appropriate to things. You can't use certain words. I know that. I might use some. Please don't report me because I don't know that I'm using them. No, I really don't. But I have heard you can't use the word Indian. And I don't know what I call somebody from India. But this is the American Indian. You're not allowed to call them indigenous people, I think you'd call.
Yeah.
So she liked the indigenous people. That's so hard to say. Indigenous people. And the culture there in Santa Fe. Some of you have been to Santa Fe. And the Mexican influences and the American influences. And so she starts a restaurant on the square. There's a beautiful square in the middle of the town, or 1 block off the square. And she makes all these dishes up, but for an expensive restaurant. And it's quite successful. She does very, very well. She gets reviewed everywhere, even in the New York Times and by food critics. So she goes to New York to a publisher, and she says, "I'm so-and-so." Oh, he's pleased to meet her. He knows who she is. And she asks for a $150,000 advance because she wants to do a cookbook. And he says, "We'd be pleased to do that." A month later, I'm traveling around the United States, and I go through Santa Fe. And I go into the restaurant, and I say, "This is really good shit. This is good food. I really like this." And I keep on going. I go to New York, go to the same publisher, and say, "I just had a terrific meal. And I would like to do a book about Southwest cooking, because I don't know anything about it." And of course, I don't get any money. Now, she was selling what everybody sells, and everybody in this room does. There's not a person here who isn't guilty, and I say guilty, of trying to sell their expertise. You go into a meeting and you try to tell the people what you know, what you can do for them. And I sell my ignorance. What's wrong with that, though? I sell my ignorance. Because it's my desire to learn and go from not knowing to knowing that makes everything I do better. Because everybody comes along in that whole journey. And the world needs people who do one thing better and better and better. They don't need me. But I need me. Because I'm so curious about everything else. So this is not proselytizing. It's just a shame that you miss so much. It's the same shame that you don't see something over there and say, Jesus, I'm going to do that for a while. Or I'm going to do that, or I'm going to learn about this or that. And see the connections and see the map in your head. Everything to me is a map. When I come in this room is a map in my head. I see an aisle down the middle, and it makes me crazy. Because it's not appropriate. It doesn't. He was at my house and I showed him some furniture. I didn't show you how the office furniture thing was designed.
Yeah, he sculpts, paints, makes coffee tables.
Well, but it's not that. See, he got part of it wrong. It's that the reason.
I'm learning then, right, Richard? I'm learning.
Well, if you think so.
Yes.
If you say so. I was trying to tell him that the coffee table is not a design, it's a diagram made into a table. I think the table's beautiful. When I do something, I can say it's nice or not nice because I no longer connect with it. It's no longer mine. I observe it as somebody else observes it. I'm disconnected with it. I'm disconnected with Ted. I'm not going to talk about Ted. I don't talk about Ted because it's over. I talk about, as I told him before, I talk about the next thing I want to do, the next thing I'm thinking about doing. I'll make references to it had some success, but I know how to make it a big step better, some other thing. But I won't dwell on something that's
What is the
over.
other thing for you now?
If you had stayed at my house longer, I would have told you. I'm thinking about two things. One, a book or a something, or a conference, or just a talk, or maybe just nothing that I dictate. I don't type. I don't do anything. I have no skill sets whatsoever. I can't use a computer. I can't do anything. You saw me try to get the keys out of my thing, and that's half an hour. I've been on assisted living for about 40 years because I don't know how to do. People just help me with everything. So, not assisted living, that kind of living, but I'm assisted, or I couldn't get through the day. So I don't know the form of this, but I was talking with a friend, and I came up with something titled shoulders. And I realized that much of my life was rubbing shoulders or standing on shoulders. That my connection to other things and other people was either, we connect by rubbing shoulders, or if it was Lucan, I stood on his shoulders. And I thought that was a nice metaphor for the diagram of the tree, because there's a nice book out that's called Trees, but it's not trees, it's the trees, the various ways and modalities of doing trees for the organization of things. And it's a nice image for me of connecting things, whether it's a tree like that connects out like that, like rivers do, or whether it's just two things and you make a choice there, which one the line is behind. Mm-hmm. So that's one project I was thinking of. And then I had done what I think is the best gathering I ever had. I did a series of things. Let me go backwards and say there's only 5 ways of innovation, to innovate. There's only 5 ways of organizing information. And I know there's 5 ways of each because I can't think of a 6th. It's not scientific. I just thought them up, and they work. I said this to this friend I have lunch with, right?
The one you know for 6 years.
Yeah. At Tuesday at lunch with him. I have lunch with somebody every week on Tuesday at 1 o'clock at one of 2 restaurants in the same building in Bal Harbor. And yesterday at lunch, it came up, this thing of friendship. And I said, Bruce, finally the other day, people ask me all the time, why do you have lunch with Bruce? And I said, because we have absolutely nothing in common. Therefore, we can talk about everything, or anything. And that's what we do. We talk about everything else. We don't focus on anything. It's like a lunch without focus. And so we got on the subject of organizing things. I said, now in 7 years I hadn't mentioned this to him. But I said, do you know my theory called latch? No, never heard of it. I said, well, just look it up. And there's a lot online that I've never seen. He read me things I didn't even, I look for things online. I like looking at stuff about myself. Everybody does that has stuff about themselves. But I haven't looked latch up in probably 5, 8 years. It's something I came up with a long time ago. He said there was a lot. He kept on reading all kinds of things, and it was written like I was given proper credit for thinking it up. Everywhere I was given credit. But he was given credit for the laws that Wurman came up with, like I did it scientifically, which it isn't scientific. It just is. And I then told him about that, the development of that, and then of innovation. And the innovation came not from sitting down and saying, I want to do the rules. I was going to San Francisco.
But explain latch for everyone in case they don't know what it is. Categorizing, location,
location,
hierarchy.
alphabet, time, category, and hierarchy. I can explain that later. It's not hard. I mean, it's a dumb thing and it works. And you'll see that it works. And it saves you a lot of time. Because when you start something, one of the things you want to do is organize the things. And you might want to organize it this way or that way. There's only 5 ways. Some things are organized both ways or 2 ways. And it sets you on a path. You're not starting fresh. The organization of information actually creates new information by their connections. Everything is really dumb. So the innovation came because I was going to San Francisco, and on the way from the airport, there was 2 signs. That one was San Francisco. This is several years ago. That San Francisco was the innovation city. People talk about that. And then there was a sign for a car that had a camera on its back, and they said this was Honda or this or that, whatever car. They all look the same now. It was an innovative thing. It was an innovation car. To put a camera so you see who you run over, right? And on the back of your car. And I realized that their sense of innovation is incremental change. It's just making something slightly better. Well, you have 2 buttons, maybe you should have 3 buttons. Oh, it's a new style, right? No, it's not. It's just a change, a little change. You know, it's not innovation. It's not what they would teach you at Babson, I would hope. Right? So there's only 5 ways of doing that, and I thought up an acronym for that, which is A, space. Space means nothing except you can remember the acronym. A, nose, N-O-S-E. It's really A-N-O-S-E, but a nose, you can say, right? You can remember that. Like I can remember your name, Doug. Well, it was important to him.
Yes.
So,
Doug Pack.
So, and that stands for, the A is really interesting. My iPhone is in there, people have iPhones. That is innovation by addition. A for addition. It's lots of different technologies packaged. Lots of technologies done by different people, not by Apple. Some by Apple. The packaging was done by Apple, sort of. It's really based on Sony's design things, but Johnny Ives did a lot of it. But it's still innovation by putting things together. That kind of phone, the smartphone, existed in all its parts before that, before the Apple. But they put it together in a package and marketed it correctly and had this growing reputation that Sony had at one time. The N is need. Many innovations come from the outside because of need, and it makes you think of things to fill that need, correct that need, solve that need, dissipate that need, etc. O is my favorite. I just watched a Nova, you should all watch, on zero and infinity. The zero part was amazing, the history of zero. It's worth watching. And you can all get Nova, get the one that's called Zero to Infinity. And the infinity thing is okay, but because infinity is really come down to calculus. But the zero and its history is quite interesting. So, O, the opposite. So what I told you about doing the cookbook is the opposite. She sold her expertise, and I sold my ignorance, right? You all sell your expertise, and I'll do something better if I go through the act from not knowing to knowing. Then I pull you along, and it is understandable. I can't type, so all my books are dictated into, now I dictate things into phone calls on Zoom that are, I don't even know how to work Zoom, so I can't record, but the people on the other end record and transcribe. So there's about 1,000 pages I've done with one person over the last 5 or 6 years, where I talk to him for an hour and a half every week for 4 of those 5 years. And he has every story. I know I know more about myself than I ever did before. It was like going to a clinic of some sort. It's amazing. And I was going to be sort of the basis of a biography, and then I realized I don't really want a biography. First of all, I'd never read it, and I'll be dead by the time it comes out. And I don't care about legacy. And even if I'm not involved, because I didn't put any money into it, because then it would make it so it, and I gave him, he could use anything without censorship. And I gave him all my papers and all my tapes. But I'd have to be involved somehow. It would take part of these last waning years of my life. Let's say I didn't have waning years and I was going to live for 20 years. It still would take a part of that that is not productive, because anything he's going to use I already know. So why take your time putting into print things you already know, or you know the outcome of it? I don't know if anything I do is going to work. I don't even sit there with my paws up hoping it'll work. I just want to do the best work I can. The last meeting I did was my best, not TED. The last meeting I did is I have a wonderful friend. I have very few friends, so you've heard me use the word, but very limited. I think one hand covers them all. I mean, Nicholas is tall, but he covers them all. So he grew up in Redlands, California. Redlands is a non-place. It's 2 hours east into the desert, past San Bernardino. It's a kind of a non-little town. It has a little university there. It doesn't have a hotel. When I've gone out there, you stay at a motel outside of town. He has a company there, and he has 15, I think now, beautiful buildings in a campus. And one of the buildings has some executive offices. There's no second in command. He owns the company 100%. You've never heard of the company, and he's on the Forbes list, but you still have never heard of him. He walked in, you wouldn't turn your head, right? He could be here now and you wouldn't know it. He's not. But he makes more software for mapping and maps than anybody else in the world, including everybody you think makes a lot of maps. And you've never heard of the company. Most of you, a few people, if you work police departments or city planning commissions, you use his maps all the time. All the maps for COVID were his maps that went through Johns Hopkins. So there was 1 billion of those. And if you live in, at the major conference he does the conference is
not in Nantucket, right? It's something different.
What?
The Nantucket conference, it's a different one?
Oh, yeah, Nantucket's different. No,
Okay.
this is, Nantucket's in Nantucket.
Mm-hmm.
This is in California, in Redlands. Okay. It's 2,400
Yes.
miles different.
Well, you can have a conference in Nantucket, but he still lives in Redwood, right? Or Redlands? No?
This guy flies coach.
Flies coach?
Yes.
He's a billionaire.
Oh, multi. Yes. It's the sort of Sam Walton syndrome, where Sam Walton had a pickup truck. And he has an old clunker. His wife has a nice car. So I did a conference, and I was trying to think of what if I really throw out everything I've learned about conferences, what is the essence? What's the beginning? I know I did things that worked, but it wasn't pared down enough. It wasn't taking away everything. It didn't remove anything. I needed to subtract more.
Mm-hmm.
NOS, subtraction. I needed to subtract things away to get innovation. So I subtracted everything I could from the conferences that you know that I did.
Mm-hmm.
He had a beautiful auditorium. He has a beautiful auditorium in this building that seats about 280. It's really nice with amazing equipment and everything. And it's very high, and it has a big screen in the front. So I said, Jack, would you take down the screen? I mean, it's a built-in screen. It cost him that much, right? He took down the screen. I said, I just want to see the concrete wall. Then I said, what person, for me, best represents a person who, without any hesitation, you would think if he was involved, it would be okay. That I would love to talk on the same stage or be in the audience if he was involved. Who is it? Who is it that I could call who would have no follow-up question from anybody if they knew he was coming? So I called Yo-Yo Ma on the phone. I assume most of you know who Yo-Yo Ma is. If you don't embarrass yourself in putting up your hands. So I called up Yo-Yo, and I said, well, He's an acquaintance of mine. I didn't say friend. I almost said that. We're sloppy with that. No, he's a close acquaintance. And I said, I know you don't have any free time ever, and I'm not doing an ask, and I'm not doing anything like that. But in a year and a half from now, in a certain month, do you have any time at all in any week that year? Do you have 3 days? He said, yes. I said, just put a dot there. I'm not asking you for anything, and I'm not asking you to say yes or no. But I'll ask you one more question. Is there anybody in the United States you would like to have a conversation with that you haven't met? He said, yeah. So I hung up the phone. I called that person up. I said, Yo-Yo would like to have a conversation with you. Will you come to the conference? And that's how I put together 50 speakers.
What was it called?
Well, the subtitle was really the name of it. It was called WWW because it was every W word you can think of. War, women. I mean, it's about 30 W words, but the subtext was the title of the conference. It was called Intellectual Jazz. Mm-hmm. So the whole conference was based on two people who did or didn't do the same thing, who did or did not know each other, sitting in chairs and not looking at the audience. It would be like if these chairs were like this, which is the way we could do this. So sit and turn yours around. Turn yours, oh, yeah, you can't do it while you do, you break your back.
I can't.
Okay, it's sitting like this. The audience is there, and I'm not looking at the audience, and there's a chair there. I'm looking at the audience sitting there. And it was one of those auditoria that the stage just goes down into there's no edge. Goes down and then goes up. So you really feel there's no barrier between you and the audience. And I sat there, and so you're a small particle physicist came in from CERN and just was involved in the Higgs particle.
Boson.
And I'm head of the Juno mission. It's going from Earth around Jupiter, which is in flight now. It's already done it, but at that time it was in flight. And I sit there and I say just that. You're both physicists. But the word elegance, which is a term used in physics, you have a different meaning to, because you're a small particle physicist and you're an astrophysicist. And you're trying to make more elements, and I'm only interested, this other guy, this astrophysicist, is only interested in helium and hydrogen. And then I didn't say anything.
So you just have 50 people.
And then they started talking. So and they never looked at the audience. There's no speeches, there was no notes, there was no subject matter. It was people getting to know each other and asking each other, I think, thought out questions because they were thoughtful people.
And what do you think came out of it relative to you say that this is one of your most favorite conferences? You've done many.
Not one of my most favorite conferences.
Yeah,
I said
your
it's
most
the best.
Favorite, yes.
It's my best. One word. It was
Yes.
my best conference.
So Richard is awesome because every time I talk to him, I learn to be more precise with my words, what I say. So if I say, hey, Richard, you're this sponge of knowledge, you're like, no, because it processes things, but a dry sponge, water just falls off.
Yes. Because I see every word you say.
I am very aware of that. Which is why.
But he's not used to it. He's not used to it.
Which is great because.
The arrogance of youth.
Yeah. But I hope you all are hearing Richard and learning from him because.
But there's no big word I'm going to use. I don't use any big words. Everything I say is dumb. There's a little film on one of my websites. These two talk to each other like they know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. There's a website called Wurman.com, and you go to it, and there's my smiling face, and there's well, it's a nice picture of me, you know? And it's not my favorite picture, but it's a nice picture. It was off of a film, which comes later in this paragraph. And then it has the list of all my books and all the conferences and all this stuff. But up top, there's a bar, and if you push media, there's different things up top.
We showed that video for this event.
Oh, you show that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in there, I'm arrogant. I'm an asshole there. At the beginning, I say I'm more powerful than anybody else in the room. And I say that, I can stand up now, we've made the point.
Sounds good.
Next time have stools. No, I want that there. I'm going to sit on the arm. Oh, you have a stool. Oh, son of bitch. There you go.
It's better?
Is it not? You answer that question yourself.
I know, that was an answer.
Well, in a good question is the answer. If you ask a question that's good, it's already answered. Because a good question is much better than a brilliant answer. It's the question. It's the question. Gertrude Stein is dying in Paris. Her friends are around her. And her eyes flutter, and she gets that purple hue on her face prior to death. And they go like this, and they hover over her body, and they say, Gertrude, Gertrude, what's the answer? She opens her eyes, and her last words are, what's the question? You see how important the question is? It's always the question. And it's always, let's get back to opposites, it's always the opposite. Niels Bohr from Copenhagen got the Nobel Prize, was a great friend of Einstein's, but argued with him. They're ferocious debates. When he got his Nobel Prize in Stockholm, one sentence in his acceptance speech was, he was rather full of himself. He said, when I have a profound thought, the opposite is also profound.
What does the E stand for then? A knows.
Oh, we're down at the end. Epiphany. A Post-it note. Nobody needed it. Nobody wanted it. Somebody thought it up. It was a mistake. It was a glue that didn't stick. Somebody saw a pattern in that and said, we could use a glue that didn't stick to make things you could put on and off things, and the Post-it note was invented. It's epiphany. Somebody had an epiphany about something for no reason. There was no market for it. They made a market. It made a market. But you couldn't predict it, and you can't train people to do it. So you have to allow for that, and that's good. Lots of ways of doing stuff. You know, there's many ways of skinning a cat. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing everything. How many ways are there to make pizza or spaghetti or anything? There's just lots of ways. Even sushi, you can cut it thick or thin, and somebody's going to say one is right and one is wrong, or a style or anything. Allow for that, but with reason. That you're doing it with intent. With intent. And you can back up that intent with a reason. I went to London. You can now take the tube from Heathrow all the way into the town. And got up from a very long escalator. They have some of the longest ones in London. Not the longest, but some of the longest ones. One of the longest is there. Going across the street, and I looked the wrong way because of traffic. And a London bus came to a screeching stop. And then its back was smashed in by a Volkswagen, the Volkswagen Beetle. The bus was maybe half the length, 50 feet or so, of a blue whale. Blue whale's 100 feet, or 100, the biggest one's I think about 113 feet. The heart of the blue whale is as big as the Volkswagen. The heart is as big as a Volkswagen. Its anus you can climb through. You can also climb through the ventricle to the heart. The Volkswagen was first produced by Hitler as the people's car, Volkswagen, the people's car, as a simple car. There was one just like it in Poland before that. Volkswagen wasn't the first. It looked just like the thing was done years before in Poland. But also, the first Toyota that was a people's car was done the same year, 1935. That's when it was done, 1935. One of the metaphors I like to use is the tango. We all know the tango. And the tango is extraordinary for me because it's about love and hate. You know, there's sort of anger and love. It's about touching, very tightly touching and holding each other and standing off. There's rules, but there's improvisation, right? It's all the opposites. It's a dance made up of radical alternatives. What is a joke? The punchline is the opposite of expectations, and you laugh. When I tell something and you titter, it's not what you expected me to say. So you laugh. It's a radical alternative. What are solutions to problems? Often a radical alternative, not just polishing the lily. It's something that looks at it differently.
What do you feel is a radical alternative in the last, let's say, decade that you look at, oh, that's innovation?
I'll tell you what's going to happen. If somebody's going to have a smartphone, it's going to be something else that's going to be radically different. That I don't know what it is, but you know it's not going to be here. If history teaches you anything, where's the fax machine? I guess I left mine at home. I mean, you had to have a fax machine. You couldn't think of a world without a fax machine. I remember going in, I was with the president of Sony USA, and I asked him some questions. He says, I'll fax it to you. I said, I don't have a fax machine. This is a long time ago. He said, well, somebody I knew for a long time, he said, Ricky, you go get yourself a fucking fax machine, and I'll fax it to you. So I went out and I bought a fax machine. And it changed my life. I then was able, in 1993, I think it was, that's when I bought my fax machine, 91 or 92, something like that, that when people came in and seen me do a couple conferences, only 2 or 3, 2. And Japan, we thought, was going to take over the world. I mean, it was Japan Inc. This is before your time, but I grew up in a time when, in the 90s, that we thought Japan, they were buying special properties in the United States, and they had all this stuff, and everybody, only Sony, that was their ad. Sony was better than Apple is today in the world. It was something else. So, and the head of Sony was an untouchable. I mean, it was just because of the kind of strata of Japan or China or a lot of places. I mean, there's people that are on strata. Where is the fax machine? It doesn't exist. Everything that you've gotten used to is not going to be here. Earlier in this talk, I said there's no food I eat that I could have eaten when I was a child. Could I believe that then? No, because that's sort of the way it was. Could I believe that people hung by the door for Time magazine to be delivered once a week because everything that was important was in Time magazine, and it became important because it was in Time magazine. And Time magazine, you thought that would be, I would always have Time magazine, or at least the substitute, Newsweek, the copy Time but wasn't as good. And you would have Life magazine because there was no pictures you could see, and Life had pictures. So you had great pictures delivered once a week, and everybody loved it. Kids loved it, grown-ups loved it. Everybody waited for Life magazine. Then its copy was Look magazine. And none of those exist, really. I mean, Time, I know, has a presence someplace, but it doesn't exist. It was the place. Now there's no the place. And if it's the place, you know it's lying. Because there's absolutely no moral integrity now. Will we ever get it back? I don't know. Maybe that's what comes next. We get moral integrity.
Define that. What do you mean by there's no moral integrity?
Everybody's lying. That's a good place to begin. We can go one step further. Everybody's shoplifting. We can go another. I mean, you can keep on going things. The very basic pillars of our society, the agreements. The agreement that had me in grammar school not be kicked out because they knew I knew. The teachers knew that I knew. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't a bad kid. We had an agreement that I'd sit in place and I would do what I had to do. They knew I knew. As you know, when you hear a lecturer, they don't know what they're talking about, but you don't get up and walk out and you plow through it, or you go to college and you memorize. Oh, here's a very interesting thing. You can take this one home with you and say you thought it up. There's one word that looks like the same word. Memory, memorize. Looks like the same word, quick, if you look at it. Memorize is our whole educational system is based on memorize. Memorizing things you're not interested in, bulimically throwing them up on a piece of paper and forgetting them. Memory comes from your interests. That you remember. Learning is remembering what you're interested in. You can define learning however you want, but my definition is correct. Learning is remembering what you're interested in, because you can't fault it. And I've never in 50 years had anybody fault it when I give it to them in the face like that and they want to make a fool of me. You can't fault it. That's what it is. That's what you remember, what you're interested in. You can do extremely well in a course that you're not interested in. We've all done that. But you don't remember it. But you pass the test. I don't take tests. If I'm interested, for instance, he told me the whole joke with Doug is, I was introduced to him as Doug. And then he came up to me and introduced himself again with his last name, which I don't remember. But I don't want to remember his last name. That doesn't do me any good to remember his last name. I'll probably never see him again in my life. I might see him again, I might not ever see him again. There's only one person in this room that I see every day, and that's somebody who runs my household. And it's Lily. So she's heard all this shit before, because every morning I come down and the coffee is waiting. I said I'm in an assisted living, and I give her my lesson of the day. And she has to stop doing whatever she's doing. She doesn't have to, but she does, and that's it. And it's before my wife gets angry. My wife would be angry if I do that. She's angry at me talking too much.
But going back to the interests, Richard, you've written 90 books.
100.
100 books.
About
100 books.
I haven't written them. I've designed them, created them, and published most of them because I don't have a publisher. I don't have an agent. I don't have a PR person. Yet I'm here without a PR person. Well, Nicholas, he's not my PR person. And this conference that I was talking about, which I said was the best conference, I never announced it. It was just word of mouth. A couple hundred people came. And those 50 people came, and we had tapes made of them, beautiful, exquisite high-def tapes of each two people. And there was, it was the people who were there, I was telling, it was like Yo-Yo was there, and I use the word like too much, sorry. Yo-Yo and Quincy Jones and Herbie Hancock and Will.I.Am, that's music. And then, then the guitar player for Billy Idol was there. And then top scientist, the top biologist in the world, E.O. Wilson, and Julie Taymor, who did the biggest, Lion King and the movie and all the costumes and directed it, and David Blaine, the magician. And I'll tell you some David Blaine stories that are really fascinating. I can even tell you a Julie Taymor story. The audience was as good as the speakers, but I didn't go certain things. Frank Gehry, Moshe Zafti, Bjorky Engels, architects. Each thing, and they all came. On their own, they got to Redlands. And we had conversations for 3 days. And then they went home. And that was it. You've never heard about it. For my 80th, I thought of a little acronym. Who asked me what something stood for? Somebody here did. I did Latch, you did sort of. I did a little, the day before I did this event, I knew I didn't have a subject for the people to talk about. I'll tell you about the event in a second. So the night before, or the day before, I think I was in my side garden. I lived up in Newport, Rhode Island, in one of the cottages. And I had, this idea came to me, because I love acronyms. It's the salesman in me, or, it's kind of Madison Avenue to like acronyms, but it helps me remember things. And I came up with, because the event ended with a great dinner, so I came up with the acronym EAT. But the acronym stood for envy, admiration, and terror. Because I realized that the people I invited, the 4 people I invited to have a conversation with me in front of some people who came, nobody was no paid for anything. It was just word of mouth. Maybe 30, 40 people came. And then I locked the doors in a huge old building that they were building wooden boats in Newport, Rhode Island. And nothing's been written about it except in my book. There's a little bit about it. But it was I don't even think the conference, that wasn't a conference, it was just a night. It was my 80th birthday. So we know it was 7 years ago. And I got Moshe Zafti, the architect, you know, from the Singapore building with the swimming pool on the roof. People know that building more than others, but he's done many better buildings than that. Frank Gehry, everybody knows Frank Gehry. Yo-Yo, and the person, John Kamen, who I've worked with a good bit, who owns Radical Media, and he's gotten a number of Academy Awards and things of that sort. And just called me yesterday from the airport in London. I'll carry that story on, by the way. That wasn't the end of the story in London. He called me from London because he was coming back from Doha through London. So. And they came. Moshe came a day early. He cut his trip short in Abu Dhabi. Frank chartered a jet, came across. And John came from New York, which is not a big deal, except he had to be back there at 8:30 the next morning. And he was staying for dinner and staying, you know, I had to get up very early to drive back. And who else did I say? Is that 4 people? Yo-Yo, John Kamen, Moshe, and Frank Gehry. Well, that's all of them. So there's 5 of us. But I realized, and there's 5 because if you came into my office, how many chairs do I have around my desk? 5. And how many things are in? There's 5 ways of innovation, 5 ways of organizing. So I like the number 5 because it's my hand. Now, if I had that finger cut off, it'd be 4 ways. And it's a good number to have some kinds of conversations. There's one kind of conversation, the best is just 2 people. Now, at that meeting, there was 3 people, but I was silent, basically, after I started it. But I was the conscience, because I would stop somebody if it was bullshit. But 5 is also the next jump up from 2 and a conscience. Anyway, I told them that the theme tonight is EAT, the 3 words. And what came out of it in a conversation, jokingly with everybody, is everybody was still, they were all terrified. They're all successful in your people's minds. They're just terrified. Terror is part of work. Just part of getting to an idea. It's not to be shunted off. You don't want to be fucking comfortable. Comfort is your enemy. It doesn't make it better. You know, that's one of the Marxian kind of pablums for people, is comfort. They admire people easier now. They have less envy than they had. But they still have some. They still have some envy. Lucan he got so little work to do that he was always envious of people who got work. I'm sure I'm envious of people who, I'm not on any boards of directors. I mean, of course you laugh at that outside. I know why he's not on any boards of directors. But I've never been asked to be on a board of directors. And you would think that because of what I've done, I'm prescient, I know things that are at the edge, but I'm not I wouldn't be good. People are right. The people who didn't ask me are correct. And I've never been an assistant to the board, and some things that are just terrifying are the way you dig yourself out of a failure to learn something. Because something that breaks, that doesn't work, is the moment. I don't like it, but it's the moment to embrace. Clearer.
What's the last thing you feel that you just fell flat on your face?
Oh, that's a very vulnerable question you asked me for me to answer honestly, and I can't not answer honestly. And even Lily doesn't know this. Well, mistakes aren't like failure. I told you I sold my car and I think it was a mistake. That's a mistake. That's not a failure. That's the easy way out for me. Okay. Oh, I really don't want to say it, but I will. When I was I have to go back to tell you of a recent failure. When I was in junior high school, I liked to paint. I thought I wanted to be an artist. My father, who knew nothing about anything but cigars and tobacco, and he went to Cuba. I went to Cuba with him. He used to go to Cuba every month, or every 2 months, not every month. He used to go to Puerto Rico every month. And to Lancaster County, where they grew some of the tobacco. And the cigar has 3 kinds of tobacco in it. It has filler, binder, and wrapper. I know a lot about the cigar business. I've worked in every single department of a cigar factory and been to the farms. And it's interesting, because it's a business where you're interested in the seed that grows the plant and the sun, and the weather, because the crops of wrapper tobacco, and wrapper tobacco has to be flawless with no blemishes, get hurt every summer by hail that comes through the tents in Connecticut Valley, where they had to move it from Cuba to get a certain kind of thin, silky leaf. But the hailstones go through the tents, the gauze tents, and can put holes in the tobacco. So weather was a big deal in my household because we were always waiting for hailstorms that would. So it's a business that has to do with the weather, marketing, of course. He made Philly cigars and Garcia Vega cigars. It has to do with different countries. Garcia Vegas were all Havana until we couldn't get tobacco out of Havana. And it was in Philadelphia. And so we also had a connection with, not a business connection, but there was a connection with the Phillies baseball team. And we knew the Phillies baseball team. And he had a box at the baseball game, which I went to with Lou Kahn and Ian McCarg and things like that, to the baseball game, which I couldn't tell people in Lou's office because the jealousies in somebody's office who was a big guy, I mean, who's very important, the jealousies is everybody wants a piece of him. So I couldn't have an inner track to a piece of Lou, so I couldn't talk about my relationship with Lou. You see how everything is a story.
Yes, it is.
But it's a meaningful story because it touches each of you in your lives. Because what I just said was the truth. It's because I'm saying absolutely what the truth is. I'm going to get back to embarrass myself in a minute. I haven't forgotten. I know you think I'm old and I'm losing my way. I am not losing my way. So I used to paint, and I wanted to be a painter. So my father, when I was in high school, he knew somebody. He knew people. He just made cigars, but he just knew people. He rubbed shoulders with people. And he was vice president of the company. He didn't own the company. He was a salary man. But because of that you're on committees, charitable committees and the various drives for people, they always collect vice presidents. But he knew also some other people because he was interested in other stuff. He read obsessively and arithmetic obsessively. I learned arithmetic not at school but from my father. Not mathematics. He didn't know mathematics. He knew arithmetic. Adding, subtracting, dividing, and a sense of numbers and a sense of magnitude. Very important because he dealt in millions of cigars. So he's always dealing in millions of pounds and things, big numbers, and dividing them, so many into boxes, so many into different things, and all the things to do with numbers. And he was just natural for that. He was good at that. And we had to be good at that. I was in high school in 11th grade. And I took there was 2 courses you could take. The one where you're going to wear blue pants or a blue shirt, you're going to be a worker bee, or a college thing. It was that cleavage between in the school. I went to I never went to a private school. Private high school. I went to University of Pennsylvania, that's a private school. But I went not to a fancy high school or any of that stuff. So I took the thing that led to college, because why would you want to take home economics or something, right? And which is, the way it was then, you look down your nose at it. Now I would take home economics because I would really want to know about what is home economics. It's the economics of running a life in a home. It would be fascinating, but it wasn't fascinating then. It was different. It was like how the girl students made aprons kind of thing. And there was a cleavage there between sexes when I went to school. I graduated in '53. It was a different world, quite a different world. So there was Temple Universities in Philadelphia, and they have an art school called the Elkins-Tyler School of Fine Arts. Something from Temple University. And it had a campus, not where Temple is, which is in the slums, but it had a campus of an art school. Somebody gifted them some buildings, and they built a campus around it. So he got me in there. It was a college thing, and a lot of returnees from a Korean War or something were there. And summers, I went to college when I was about 13, 14. So I learned different things. I particularly learned about etching and lithography. And I liked etching very much and printing very much. I printed for some of the faculty members there because I loved printing and doing etching. I really liked etching. So I was really committed to being an artist. And in high school, I went to night school there. And so I had my zone. But in 11th grade, my father said, I have a friend who's the president of a teeny little college in Pennsylvania. He got his doctorate on testing people. I'm going to get you to go to see him for a couple of days. It was about 40, 50 miles away. And he's going to give you 2 days of tests. So we did. I took all the tests. I came into him before I left, and he said, well, here's what you're good at, or what you have a proclivity for, or what you probably can do. You know, it's like the Cooter preference test that people take in high school, used to take in high school, which is a very bad test, as most tests are. It should be like Jeopardy. You have to think up the question. I mean, it's the question. Think up 20 great questions about 20 subjects, and you're marked on how good your question is. That's a mark of intelligence, to ask a good question, not how's it going, right? He said, there's a few things you could do. Of course, you know, you like to paint, so you can do that. You can do archaeology. You can do architecture and hairdressing. That was the last time I got a haircut. So I just cut my own hair, and I just cut it with a blunt scissors. And I don't cut it in the back because I don't see it. It's like various people say, we worship the sun because we can see it. That's our religion. Not a bad idea. Hurt your eyes a bit, but it's not a bad idea.
Your hair looks good.
I thank you, young man.
No, amazing. I love it.
Take off your hat. Let's see yours.
Oh no, my hair's terrible. Let's not put my hat today. That's a good suggestion. Your hair is fantastic. I wish I had a hair like yours.
So I realized quickly there was a pattern here. Because if I took archaeology, I couldn't move to the other two. I couldn't take archaeology and become an architect if I didn't like it, or become a painter. Likewise, if I'm a painter, I couldn't become an architect or an archaeologist. But if I became an architect, I could go into painting and I can go into archaeology. It's an easier move. So I said, okay, I'll take architecture. It was that simple. But then, since I wasn't going to go to college, I never took a language. And you had to have 2 years of a language to get into any college then. So I went into the dean, who I was not a dean, principal. I remember his name and the class advisor, but I'm not even going to say them. Lloyd Ashby. Anyway, Lloyd Ashby, they're like all principals. And he didn't like me because he knew I knew. But I said that I want to make a deal. I did the same thing when I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I went into the dean, and I made him a deal. I'll tell you that deal later. And I said, I want to make a deal. I will next year, first semester, I'll take first year French. Second semester, I'll take second semester, second year French, and you'll give me credit for 2 years. So he did, and I did, and I got into college. You can learn most things in a short period of time if you have to. In the Marine Corps, you don't get shot on the range if you're with live ammunition. Most people don't. If you have to do something, you learn really quick. That's a great motivator. In The 2,000-Year-Old Man, which of course the whole title of it was stupid, but there's a famous comedy skit about the 2,000-year-old man that Mel Brooks wrote, or Mel Brooks is asked as being a caveman. Of course, 2,000 years is not a caveman. They were 26,000 years ago. But he's asked, well, what did you use for transportation then? And he says, well, there was no buses, there was no cars, there was nothing like that. When we lived in the cave, what we used for transportation was fear. Saber-toothed tiger came, we ran. And that's fear. It's not a bad thing. The fear of not knowing how to do something and having to learn very fast. You learn really fast. It's terrifying, but it's okay. You shortcut a lot of the bullshit by just putting yourself in a situation which is, eat or be eaten. And so you fail. There's something else to do always. There's so many things to do. There's so many things to be interested in, and flip them on their side and find a new pattern through them. There's just so many things. You know, there's not enough minutes in a day. So back to my story.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up soon, actually.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, 2 minutes, I don't have to tell a story. So I'm not going to answer that one. Because we don't have the time. And it's embarrassing. It was a desire that it didn't come true. And it's about something in my work. And I don't want to... I'm over the vulnerability of it now, but I wasn't then, so that's the last thing I remember as being. It was something that didn't work that I wanted to work. I'm going to tell the story because I can't do that. That's just playing with you. Okay. It goes back to painting. So at the end of high school, I was painting a good bit, and then I graduated, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania, to the School of Architecture, which then was a 5-year undergraduate thing. The deal, I'll do this real fast because I know you want to get out. Anybody has to leave because they have to be someplace, just go. It doesn't bother me at all. Honest to God. Bye now, and then you can go. And I'll tell you the story anyway. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I knew I wanted to keep on painting a little bit. So they had one just in the, there was no painting. There was the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which was affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania, but you couldn't go there. But there was one little painting course that they gave out actually at the University Museum in the basement. And it was the only space they had, so I took a paint course. And I took it on the basis of, I said, I don't want any instruction. I don't want any test at the end of the year or semester, each semester. I'll show you what I did. Give me a mark, you know, it'll be good, so it's fine. So I did that for years, 12 hours a week. I painted all through school. And I did well, and in fact, the first year, I wanted to leave after the first semester. And my father said, stay a year, then you can leave. Because I thought everybody was so fucking stupid. And I had this dream about going to university. And I thought the students would be smart. Because I went to high school, and they were smarter in my high school than they were in college. There were some really smart people. I wasn't the smartest kid. There were smart kids in high school. And there weren't smart kids in the university, as far as I was concerned. So I wanted to leave and do something else, go to Alaska. It was the things you want to do when you're 19. And he said, stay the year, then you can go. By the end of the year, I had started winning the freshman award, an award for my painting in the university-wide competitions of things, just the paintings I did in the basement of that building. And I kind of liked it. I met Lou Kahn, who was teaching there. So my life changed by my father saying, yes, you can, but just finish out the year. It was very, very good advice. And he didn't know what I was doing. And it did change my life. Not the University of Pennsylvania, but meeting two people there, two teachers I had, changed my life. Nothing else. I did very well there. And the deal I made with the dean the first day, he was sort of anti-Semitic and a Boston Brahmin. And the University of Pennsylvania then was considered for about 8 or 9 years the best architectural school in the country. Now I don't know if there's a best school, and they've changed from 5-year undergraduate to just a graduate school where you have to have something. I think it's still a pretty good school, but I don't really know. I think it's pretty good. Anyway, I went at 18, I guess I was still 18, and I went to 1953. And I went to where you have to check in to go to college, and they give you this sheet then. There was no computers, of course, and the thing had these little sheets that they type on and it goes through the copy paper and stuff like that. And it was printed out, and it had the courses I had to take, you know. So I said, okay, you know, where do I sign? No, wait in line, and you have to see your advisor. I thought, oh my God. I said, this is madness. I'm starting off the rest of my life, because you think when you start college, you're starting the rest of your life. I'm starting off the rest of my life with an act of madness. I have to take these courses. Why do I have to see somebody to tell me, you have to take these courses? Why don't you just sign it and put it in a box? So I went into the dean's office. And I spent a long time sitting there. He wouldn't see me. But I didn't leave. So I went in to see him and I told him. And I was dressed crappy. I was a beatnik before beatniks. And I wanted to, it was me. I wanted to show you how independent I was. I wore boots that my father got me in Cuba. And I had a beard, and then my pants were old dishwasher pants, and they were too short. He had every reason not to see me. It's not his fault he didn't want to see me. But he didn't want to see me, and I didn't see it that way. You know, he's serving me, I'm paying him that tuition, which was not very much then. It was in the hundreds of dollars, you know. And finally I wouldn't leave, so his secretary, who was like him, got me in there. And I said, I came here, and while I was waiting to see my advisor, I looked at the catalog, and I felt like a pig in shit. There was so much stuff that I wanted to do that was in there. I would like to make a deal with you, Dean. I will take every course you tell me to take. Absolutely. I'll take every course you give me that I have to take. But I want permission, without going through an advisor, to take anything else in the university that I sign up for if I can work it in my schedule. And he said, sure, because everybody flunked out of Penn. I didn't know that. The first year in architecture, half the class goes. Then half the class was over. And other universities do that. Did that. I don't know if they do it now, but they did that. That the first year was half the people leave for one reason or another. So and he said, you have to keep an A- average. I said, no problem. And that started me off in life. Because I took a triple load, not a double load. I was in school all day and every night, and Saturday mornings, not Sunday and not Saturday afternoons. And I was in class. When I told you before, I don't take notes because I had no time to study. So I couldn't take notes because you take notes to study from. So I work backwards in the problem. If I'm not going to use them for studying, why should I take them in class and throw them away? And then I came up with my own theory. This is not scientific. This is my theory, and because I believe in it, it's true. I mean, for me, not for you. I believe if you take notes, like you're doing here, if you take notes, you tell your brain, well, you don't have to remember that because you have it in that note. And so you don't listen as well. But if you have no notes, you have to really listen. Do I listen?
I think so. Yes.
Do I listen? Do you feel I'm listening to you when you talk?
Yes.
Okay. I listen to this day what people say. They might not think I'm listening, but I hear well. My eyes are a little blurry. So I didn't take notes, but I took enormous numbers of courses in obtuse things. Inter-Asian ethnology and technology, the making of a Japanese sword and inside painted snuff bottles from Japan, even though it was started in China. Most of the things in Japan were started in China. But the Japanese did them better, clearer, and marketed it as a national treasure, and they take credit for it. But some things they made better. But they were started in a very old civilization that did many, many things. And I did well. I graduated with the highest average in the class, and I got the gold medal. I did all the things. I was a golden-haired boy. I was supposed to be a good architect. And then everything else was so interesting. And so my life is a failure because I didn't do anything well. It's just everything is sort of interesting. And I love television. Don't ever take television away from me. Oh, I think it's amazing. I remember our first set, which was this big black and white RCA, that deep and that wide. And had a little screen, and for a while we put something green on it because it was supposed to make it clearer. It wasn't color, of course, and we had 2 channels, then we got a third. It was NBC, it was CBS, NBC, ABC. Television is amazing, which you can, if you have all these hundreds of channels, I think What a great tool. It's better than holding it. But I do that too. I'm on only one program. I'm on Facebook. I know it's a crap, and I know it's all the things that people write about, but there is a thread through it where I learn a lot of things. There's a thread through stories that people send me and photos that people send me and facts that I can look up on my iPhone, which is not the best source then, but it leads me to other sources that I can look up things. So I spend a lot of time browsing. My life is browsing to find patterns. And patterns made understandable is cartography. And the other half of my life is cartography. And this person in Redlands that makes maps, where I invent some cartographies that he turns into, from my youth, I show him my inventions from 1960s, and he turns them into computer programs. So if you go online and you see, and you put it in Wurman dots, you'll see a computer program based, and they tell you about it, based on a map system that I invented in 1967 of an urban atlas of comparative mapping. So most of my work is on comparative analysis by mapping and visual things and other things. And it turned into information architecture, which I invented when I did the AIA conference for the bicentennial in Philadelphia in 1976. And it was called the architecture of information. And then I invented information architecture. And when I did the Aspen conference, it was called the Invisible City. So I've always been interested in cities. And it was before Calvino came out with his book, The Invisible City. Two completely different things, only his book was really good, and mine was a conference that was over. His book is with us on a different way of using that title. That's everything in a nutshell. Except, during COVID, I ran out of frames. This is collapsing a story now. I couldn't get frames, and I was painting. But I knew I could get plasticine, and it could be delivered. So I got plasticine. And I thought I would do some sculpture. I'd never done sculpture before in my life, so I would do it. But while I was doing my paintings, some of the paintings were okay. And I look at them the way you look at them. They're no longer mine a few weeks after I do them. I will pass by one and say, well, that's not bad, that's pretty good. And somebody came to visit me, the guy who owns Books and Books, which is a bookstore here in town. So he came over to say hello. And I live in Golden Beach, and he was visiting his store in Bal Harbor. And he looked at some of the paintings on the walls, and he said, Jesus, where'd you get that? Who's the dealer for that? Who did that? I said, I did. He didn't believe me. And I said, yeah, no, I do that. It's something, because I don't advertise that I paint. You don't see it in if you look me up, you didn't see painter. Well, I didn't know it, but he went back to his main store, which is next door to the museum, a small museum in Coral Gables, which is south of Miami, some distance away, but south of Miami. And that's the Coral Gables Museum. And he told me, he said, you should show some of his stuff there. So then the two people, the curator and the head of the museum, came to see me all the way up to Golden Beach. And they said, we'll give you a show in a year and a half. I didn't ask for a show. By the time the year and a half went, I'd stopped painting. So I had all the paintings, but I had done sculpture, and I got them cast in bronze. Now, as you saw, I have bronzes all over the house. Now I've stopped doing bronzes. I've done my last bronze. I might go back to painting. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I had this show of 46 of my paintings and 24 of my bronzes. Big show. The whole museum was my show. Now I answer your question. I thought people would like it and write about it or talk to me about it. And I went to it a couple of times. Nobody came up and said they liked it. Maybe it's shit. And I lost all my, I know I like them, and I know some of them are okay, but nobody liked them, and that was a failure. That was a disappointment. I didn't want to sell them. I just wanted somebody to like them. And I wanted to be fussed over. I wanted to be wanted. And for so much of my life, I've done things where they liked the thing, but I was never wanted. I had to invent it. I've done all these books. Nobody has ever asked me to do a book. Nobody has ever asked me to do a conference. I've done 100 books, 40 conferences. So everything I do, I have to think up, figure out how to fund it. I don't have family money. I figure out how to do it. It's a shell game. My life is a shell game. And so being wanted is really important. And yet everybody envies me because I don't have clients. They envy the freedom that not having clients gives you. You see how everything is the opposite? That I'm in an enviable position to say I don't have a boss. I don't have somebody who makes me march. But then I'm standing there all by myself and I'm the judge of what I do. So every single thing I do can be a humiliation, where I can't lay it off on somebody. I said, well, they asked me to do it. They said it was okay. If it's shit, it's my shit. That's a good place to end.
It is.
Hey, thanks for sharing that.
What?
Thank you for sharing that.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to see. I never told her.
Yeah, and just so all of you know, I was at Richard's house before and I saw one of the sculptures, and one of them was, you hear that, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. He has the opposite of that. So I would like to thank Richard again for coming here today. Please, all of you, let's give Richard some love.